How's the last day and a half been? You guys learning some good stuff? Yeah? I had a chance to sit in on some sessions. I couldn't make it yesterday. I flew in this morning and got to see Balash and a couple of other sessions, which were awesome. And there seems to be a really good vibe. Lots of people talking about different ways that they can use NPS scores to rank their team, different tools to source talent, different ways to communicate, different ideas about marketing. So I wanted to try and bring some of those themes today for this last presentation. And a huge thanks to Robin, Jan, and Toby, and Daniel, and all the guys for having me here. It's a privilege, really, it is a privilege to speak here. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Johnny. Despite Robin's over-large introduction, I'm a recruiter. I have worked in recruiting for the last nearly 20 years, and I run a company called Social Talent, which is an online platform that organizations use to improve their recruiters and measure that performance through software and analytics. We work with lots of really interesting businesses across the world, get to meet lots of different recruiters, see how their teams are working, and also see what technologies they're using, what processes as well. And that's the huge advantage and difference I've had over the last 6 years to my previous careers, the insight into what other teams do day to day compared to what I did back in the day. I'm going to put these slides up on SlideShare as soon as we're done, so don't worry about trying to copy anything. If there's worth anything copying from the slides, they'll be available online after this and also distributed through the guys. If you do want to ask me any individual questions that you don't get to ask now, do so by reaching out to me online. So not many people know how I started my career. My career started at 11 years of age in a video shop called Eurovideo in Ballantyre in Dublin, where I grew up. And I worked in this video shop for 7 years, my first job. So I was 11 years of age, obsessed with films. We couldn't afford a video player back then. If anyone remembers the 80s, nobody had video players. My best friend up the road had a Betamax, and we used to rent a VHS player from down the road. I'd argue over the merits of which was better. He only had one video. He had Rocky, and then he eventually got The Champ, which was a boxing movie, another sports movie later on. But we used to rent VHSs, and I used to just hang out in the video store and watch the movies that were shown in the store. And eventually the owner, a woman called Eileen, took pity on me and asked if I wanted to come back the next day and help her out. And she paid me £2 an hour for probably the first 4 or 5 years. They were my wages. And I worked 3-4 days a week in that video shop for 7 years. And by the end of it, I had 6 other jobs by the time I quit when I was in university. But I kind of got to know that industry really, really well. And I felt I was a bit of an expert. People used to come on a Friday night and ask for advice on movies. And my advice was great, I thought. It's crazy. You ask a 15-year-old what movie I should watch for my whole family on a Saturday night, but this is what people used to do. And I was really efficient at giving out the videos. I knew the number of every single movie. They all had a number. And you could name it. Today, to this day, any movie released up until about 1995, I can tell you the number of that video in Eurovideo. But you can't disprove the number I give you. I could tell you it's 3304. You have no idea if I'm telling the truth. But I knew all this stuff. I became a real expert in that area. These days, do we go to VHS video stores anymore? The video store began to evolve not long after I left the industry. Not correlated, by the way. Wasn't correlated. In the US, Netflix began posting DVDs out to people. So there's no DVDs when I worked in the video shop. That came probably a year or two later. They were very expensive, and Netflix begun to build a business around this that eventually put their biggest competitor, Blockbuster, out of business a few years ago. And then that business itself shifted towards what we know today, which is Netflix. Hands up here who uses Netflix? Most of us. We consume our movies, our shows online. The Johnny Campbell 15-year-old is now a search algorithm and ranking index that suggests this is 97% suitable for you. Or it's crowdsource ratings, it's 4 stars. Or if you're like me, you go onto IMDb before you think of watching any TV show, and if it doesn't get an 80% or higher, I'm not watching that show. So that's the modern way we do this. The world of video store is gone. If I had stayed in that video store, I'd be long gone out of a job. So now I work in the recruiting industry, as do you. And we are, I think, facing, in my time in recruiting, the second major upheaval. It's not the second major upheaval in recruiting in general, it's the second of my time. I started in 1998 in recruiting, and I worked in a recruitment agency. And we weren't quite a high street agency, but we were based in the center of the city. I set up and ran the accountancy and finance desk. We had engineering was our core. We developed IT, and then other businesses over time. Grew to about 65, 70 people when I moved on to my next firm. And that business model existed for a long time, but was disrupted, I think, first in that period in about 2008. Two reasons the industry was massively disrupted. One was the recession. Everybody started looking at what they were doing and saying, is this a waste of money? Is this the right way of doing it? And social media started to explode. It was the first full year that Facebook was opened outside university campuses. LinkedIn was still small but growing. Twitter started becoming a thing. Lots of different sites began to explode. And that was a really big factor because prior to that, you had to pay for access to someone else's database, unless you were a massive organization with your own, which was only a handful of companies. So the recruitment agencies held all the candidate details. So this was the big shift. We'd begun to be able to find any data we want online, which was sourcing and how kind of the real world of sourcing kicked in, which wasn't, it was around longer than 2008, but really started to become a thing when you could find everybody's profile online. And today, I think we're being shaken up by a couple of other factors. It started, just like Netflix started with posting DVDs, they scaled it. It started with the outsourcing of a lot of recruiting functions. Hands up here who outsources part of their recruiting function to a different country or a different part of the world. Different part of the world, different country. There's a lot of this going on where you might outsource your sourcing, your long listing. It might be to a different country. Does anyone here outsource to a third-party provider like an RPO or MSP? Anyone use that? A recruitment process outsourcer or managed service provider. Firms will do this on scale for you. Balash used to run one of them and set the EMEA business up doing that better than most of the customers could do it because that was the whole idea. But today, the kind of evolution of this is all the new technology driven by mostly artificial intelligence and in the sub-branch of machine learning, where tech is beginning to erode our jobs, beginning to start taking things that were done manually, either by us, in what you might call the Western or rich world, and even the low-cost countries where we've outsourced some of these functions to. We have chatbots that can interact with candidates rather than have them apply in your career site. We have scheduling AIs like X.AI and others that will schedule all the interviews with your candidates and follow them up and make sure they get booked into all the diaries without having recruitment administrators doing it. We have technology like Textio that is rewriting your job ads to guarantee higher response rates and more diverse candidates or whatever you want the algorithm to do. We have Ray by hiring Solved, which you can talk to, and it will do the sourcing and search for you. Don't even have to write a Boolean string. Don't even have to look at it. You've got Smashfly as a CRM. I've recently done an integration where you can actually feed in your job spec. It will go either to just your database or your database plus all the open web sources. It'll develop through an algorithm a shortlist in about 1 second. It will then send a message to everybody on that shortlist by finding their details if it doesn't have them, or using your own details. It'll follow up 6 or 7 times, and everybody who responds saying they're interested get put in a filter, and that's the first time a recruiter sees the process. So it literally brings you qualified, available, interested applicants without you having to touch the system. Not difficult to set up. Lots of technologies competing with that. So AI is beginning to kind of come into our industry. I think it is the shift that I saw in the recruitment industry that we all saw back in the 90s, early 90s in VHS and videos. There was this shift. You might look at in the taxi industry. Uber was the first phase. It was the DVD in an envelope phase of transport. But self-driving cars is ultimately the destination. So at the moment, we saw RPOs or outsourcing as the first phase, but is automation or are robots really the next phase of what we're going to see in recruiting? This disruption is not unique to us in our industry. We tend to look around in recruiting and think our problems are unique. Nobody else has these problems. But nearly every business in the world today is facing digital disruption. It's a massive issue for almost every CEO out there. And 70% of them say that they don't have the organizational capability to deal with this technological change. They don't know how to deal with it, don't have a plan for it. So it's not just us. Every industry is being shaken up by technology. Has anyone heard about this case study that was reported upon in the Washington Post on Inc. about Unilever and their campus hiring? Anyone heard about this? So Unilever, like Procter & Gamble and a lot of the FMCG companies, they hire a lot of graduates every year. So as an experiment last fall, as the Americans call it, because autumn is too complicated a word to think about, bless them. Last autumn, around this time last year, they decided to pilot an AI-driven recruiting campaign. So like most of us who do recruiting on campus, they literally went on site to all the major universities around the US, sent their campus recruitment team physically there to do different campaigns. Who here does university or campus recruiting in their organization? Okay. Ah, you know this well then, yes? So this is a great story. Unilever in this experiment, and correct anything that I say wrong after the fact, right? It's not corrected live. So Unilever decided to put a couple of pieces of technology in place. So the first part was they decided to run advertisements on Facebook, on the way up, and on one more site. Its name is now escaping me. The Muse. So 3 different sites, 2 websites that are career-oriented in the US, largely around graduate recruiting, and then just running Facebook targeted ads. Didn't go on campus for this effort. So they targeted based on demographic information that's available from all those sources. So when you saw the ad, you clicked on the call to action and you found online material promoting this job to you based on your demographic information. The only way you could apply was with your LinkedIn profile. You weren't allowed to apply with a CV or anything else. You had to just automatically sync your LinkedIn profile. The intelligence then looked at that LinkedIn profile and it did a screen to see the keywords in your profile, the different so on and so forth, and it made a cut. It cut a bunch of people out of it, and then it invited the next group of people who made the first cut to complete several online assessments using an online tool called Pymetrics, I think, which had 12 games or challenges in total that the different candidates were asked to complete. Again, graduate recruitment, it's hard to know if someone's capable based on their experience up to 22 years of age, so you've got to test them a little bit. That then made a cut of people who didn't make it past the assessment, but the ones who did were sent an email to invite them to complete an asynchronous interview on HireVue. But it was using HireVue's new technology with other companies do have in place, or similar technologies in place, that didn't require anyone to review your video answers. It used AI to review your video answers, looking at things like your tone of voice, of course the words you used, but also your pacing, eye contact, etc., to fit a predefined model of what success looked like in Unilever. That made another cut of people who didn't make it in. And everybody after that who did make it were finally invited to meet with a real person. So that was the first time a real person got involved in the process, apart from the design phase, of course. And you were brought in for an actual interview. And of those people who got it to that phase where they met real people, 80% were hired. So what do we learn from this? Well, people got hired, big deal. But under the stats, the timing of this was considerably different. On average, the campus recruiting cycle took up to 4 months. I believe this cycle took in the order of around 24 days to actually complete. So time frame, unbelievably faster than the previous manual process. It was cheaper, hell of a lot cheaper than sending loads of people on site around the country into different universities, notwithstanding the fact that tools like Pymetrics and HireVue aren't cheap, still better than sending all those people to those different locations. But the quality, 6 months later when it was benchmarked in the organization, was at the very least the same as all the previous campaigns, and in many instances reported by the hiring teams, higher quality candidates were hired from this batch, higher quality than humans before. So this is coming into not just small companies, little startups. This is impacting massive, established, large organizations like Unilever, like Accenture, like Jet.com, Amazon. Other businesses are beginning to look at the recruiting process and see how can we put really good technology in here to make it faster, better, smarter, and cheaper. Which begs the question, what the heck are we all here for? Is anyone fearful of their jobs at this stage? Well, I started wondering, is this industry that I'm in now, am I about to see another industry die with technology where all the people are going to disappear? Is it going to be the case that in a few months' time, it's going to be the machines doing all the recruiting and not the humans? I hope not, because my entire business is based around how do we make people better. We don't make bots or algorithms that automatically do your recruitment for you in social talent. What we do is focus on the people. Our job is to make people smarter. So I really hope that isn't the case. But let's look at the stats. I want to compare the average recruiter, the human, to what we might call the super recruiter, which maybe could be a machine, some sort of AI-driven technology, or maybe it's just a really, really good recruiter. So I'm going to share with you some of the statistics we've taken out of a survey that we've been running for 3 years, which we're publishing in about 2 weeks' time. So when I upload these slides, it'll be the first time some of this data is available, but the full data will be available to pour over in about 2 weeks' time. And do let us know if you want the full report. So about 2,000 responses all over the world, different people who self-report themselves as working in recruitment and or sourcing. We asked them a bunch of questions and we crunched the numbers. So this is what average looks like. The average recruiter, to fill one job at the very bottom of this funnel, needs to begin with finding 225 people. Of those 225 search results, they typically reach out to an average of 63, of which about 22 respond, of whom they put forward around 6 to a hiring manager, or client if it's an agency, of which the hiring manager interviews 4, and she will eventually offer one of those. We've been running this same data for about 3 years, and that funnel hasn't changed that much in 3 years. This is really, really consistent across the different years, across different verticals, across different markets. And this is what average looks like. So 27% of respondents go forward. Something like only 28% of people they find in a search are worth contacting. You can do the maths on some of the other conversions there. Does this look efficient? What do you think? Who here hires really difficult technical skills or hires them in really hard to find locations? So think of it. To make one hire, you have to have a pool of 225. Does that always exist? I used to hire catastrophe modeling analysts who understood floodplains across Central European plains and specialized in general insurance. These people are not easy to find. And I used to have to find one of them every about 3 months, right? Chief scientist roles or whatever they were called in reinsurance. I would never find 225 people. It's not terribly efficient, but that's what most recruitment looks like today all over the world. I want to compare that with super recruiters. Not machines, not AI, not machine learning technology, but just really fucking good recruiters. People who just do great stuff, like a lot of the speakers you would have met today, or colleagues hopefully you've met here, and hopefully some of you guys. This here is what great looks like. And I'll define what great is. I looked at loads of metrics where people self-reported themselves as having a high conversion on one of those points. And the one that really stood out and made a massive difference was response rate. So the recruiters who were really good at getting a high response rate, they seem to have attributes of a super recruiter all over the place. Their funnel is very, very different, you'll see. To find one person on average, they just need a pool of 40 people. I'm going to focus on 2 areas where the difference is really, really high. So one is their response rate. The average recruiter, when they reach out to somebody cold on Zing or LinkedIn or on Facebook or somewhere else, they get about 1 in 3 people coming back to them. That's rising slightly year on year. A lot of companies like LinkedIn and Zing have made a big push in their marketing on better communication. Heck, last year on this stage, I talked about how to better improve your response rate. People are getting a little bit better. But the great recruiters, they're getting 90% response rates. There's only the occasional person who doesn't come back to them. Big difference. Anyone here in the room who gets in, let's say, in excess of 60, 70% response rates? Be brave. It's okay. I'm not going to pick on you or ask you to explain anything. You can put your hand up. More than 67, 70% response rate from outreach? Anyone? Okay. Not a lot of us. It's great. That means there's loads of room to improve. It's a good thing. Don't worry about that. So huge difference. Second big difference, when they get responses, on average, recruiters only put forward 1 in 4. Now, there's 2 factors at play. Some of the candidates just don't want to go forward. They'll respond but say, thanks, but not for me, or not now, or the salary's not right, or that location doesn't work. And some of them will come back and go, I'd love to go forward. And when you talk to them, you go, you're a nutcase. There's no way I'm sending you forward to that hiring manager. You're just crazy. Thank you, but no. So you'll deselect people, and they'll deselect themselves. But super recruiters, they put forward twice as many of that pool. If you think about it, that's a really important factor. And they're not putting crap forward because their conversion after that is exactly the same. The hiring managers still interview approximately 2/3 of those people. So they're not just putting double the crap forward. They're able to influence better, or perhaps they're attracting better people in the first place. But all in all, this funnel is 5.5 times more efficient, 550% more efficient. So people, you and I, can be that much better. But when you kind of look at those stats, you start realizing there's a difference. Now, just for your own information, I looked at the German stats. So all of our German responses, and the right-hand side is the German funnel. So German responses to this survey, and there was quite a number of them, about 90-odd people out of the 2,000 were recruiters who said they recruited in Germany. Okay, so recruited in Germany, not just based in Germany, but recruited in this market. The funnel is quite similar. It's actually 12% less efficient, right? I wouldn't lose sleep over that. Not the end of the world. But on average, it's less efficient than the average. And it's pretty much the same near the bottom. You'll see that the difference really comes in the quality of search near the top. So 66 and 63, almost the same. It's the quality there. You're finding, on average, more candidates that are unnecessary, are not worth reaching out to at the top of the funnel. Everywhere else, it's more or less the same. You don't see huge variance country to country. There are some more efficient than others, but in Germany, it's pretty much the same. When you look at efficiency, and those of you who run recruiting teams, you will look at efficiency. Those of you who work in a recruiting team, your boss, she's looking at your efficiency. She should be looking at your efficiency. All right? You're going to look at 2 factors. Recruiting efficiency is made up of the output divided by the cost of that input. So how much you produce. And output could be, it could be about the volume of hires. It could be the quality of hires, the speed of hires. Every recruiting team focuses on different metrics. I totally get that. What you call efficiency is different to somebody else. But whatever you call it, you get some sort of output, and there's a cost to that. And so we focus on trying to make that more efficient. And a lot of the time we have focused on the cost. How do we just drive down the cost of getting the same amount of output from that team? And this has led to outsourcing. So around the world, in places like India, in Eastern Europe, in Southeast Asia, and even in the States, there's a lot of outsourcing to the middle countries, the cheaper parts of the states. So the East and West Coasts are expensive, so you outsource to people who work at home. The recruiting team, for example, for Sodexo, they have 100 recruiters and sourcers. Not a single one of them works in the same office. Every one of them, including the VP of Talent Acquisition, works from home. It's cheaper, and they get great results, and people are generally happier. This is another trend that we're seeing. But you look all over the world, I'm seeing recruitment administration and sourcing as being the 2 top things that people outsource. Balázs, would you have seen that in Randstad back in the day and the work you do with other organizations? Yeah, thanks. It's like, oh, fuck you, Johnny. Yeah. Okay, so administration, the scheduling of interviews, the setup of different bits and pieces, doing all that admin, even kind of back and forth with your ATS and CRM, and the sourcing. Hands up who loves doing recruitment administration. Hands up who loves scheduling loads of interviews. Anyone? Maybe it's my English. Maybe you didn't understand. Hands up who loves sourcing. A handful of you. It's okay. Hands up who loves having to source the same people over and over and over and over again. The sources I know who love sourcing love variety, love challenges. Not like, seriously, more customer services people who speak German and Dutch? Okay, let's go again. Let's go again. Same as last week, right? The great thing is the things that were being outsourced aren't exactly the most exciting parts of your job. But those outsourced markets are becoming more and more expensive. 2016 was the year that in manufacturing, robots became cheaper than manual labor for general manufacturing. They've been cheaper for specialized manufacturing for some time, but this is a big risk for places like China and India, where it's actually going to be cheaper just to put robots in rather than hire thousands of staff in places like Foxconn to do the job for you. But wage inflation in Eastern Europe is much higher than Western Europe, same in places like India and parts of Southeast Asia, where you see business process outsourcing. So this is becoming more expensive. So the let's outsource to someone cheaper is not going to be viable going forward. Opportunity, though, is huge. And when you see technological innovation, it's when there's a big opportunity and it's cheap enough to do it. It has to be cheap enough to do it, and it has to be a big opportunity. The opportunity, trust me, is huge. And the cost of doing it and the cost of automation is plummeting as well. So, if we want to keep our jobs, we want to make sure that the bots don't take over, that Autotron isn't taking over the job, we need to figure out how do we become super recruiters. And these are the insights I want to share with you. So there's 4 assumptions I wanted to try and test with this data. 1, I've always been convinced that giving someone an incentive makes them better. Those of you who've worked in, who here has ever worked for an agency, recruitment agency, staffing agency in their lives? Keep your hand in the air. Who else has a bonus based on their output in recruitment? Some sort of performance-related bonus. Interesting. About 67%, I think, I'll show you the stat in a second, of recruiters surveyed have some sort of performance-related bonus or incentive in their jobs. So I thought, well, this might mean something. Let's have a look at the data. Second of all, we all love networking. We've contacts everywhere. It's add followers. Let's get our followers, get our connections, build them up. Does being really networked help you as a recruiter? That was the second thing I wanted to look at. Third, where do we find talent? We had sessions on how to use LinkedIn, how to use Facebook, how to use other places. Is there a magic place these super recruiters are finding the great talent? If only somebody would reveal that amazing, awesome tool that I don't know about, where all the talent are. I'd love to know what that is. So where do they look? And last thing, engagement, what we talked about last year. How important is that to the super recruiter? Let's go through these. So first of all, incentives. 62% of respondents do receive performance-related pay. And when we looked at the data of those individuals, they do deliver, on average, higher quality shortlists by the measure of the percentage of those candidates that are called forward for interview. So it seems they deliver higher quality. They do fill the jobs faster. Their average time to fill is faster. But they work longer hours, quite a bit, 5 to 10 hours a week longer than everybody else. And interestingly, their top to bottom funnel, although they're better at some parts of it, is pretty much the same as the average recruiter. So although they seem to improve in parts of the funnel, whenever they make an improvement somewhere, they drop it somewhere else. So top to bottom, they're still looking pretty much the same, maybe 2 or 3% better, which statistically isn't very valid. And super recruiters, those brilliant people, are 15% less likely to have performance-related pay. So just looking at output, you're less likely to have some sort of bonus if you're a super recruiter. And super recruiters work less hours, but they work on 26% more recs, more jobs than the average recruiter and these performance-related people. So it seems to me that, yes, there's a correlation, but why is always interesting. And I beg the question, are these people getting better results in some parts of their funnel merely because they work longer hours? You work longer, you're going to get slightly more, but I don't think these people are necessarily working smarter. So my take from this, and it's only an observation, is perhaps performance-related pay makes you work longer, but it doesn't necessarily force you to look at what you do and make it more efficient. Second thing, connections. Hands up here who has more than 1,000 LinkedIn connections. More than 2,000. More than 3,000. The elusive more than 3, 4, 5,000. So we asked our respondents as well. And don't worry too much about the granularity, the detail here. It's different in different parts of the world. The US are more networked on average than Europeans, and we're more networked than those in Asia Pacific. Asia Pacific are getting more networked compared to last year at a faster rate than we are. We're about static, and the Americans went ahead a little bit. So they're more networked than us, those Americans. But we wanted to see the difference it made to those super recruiters. So again, looking at the data, 46% of recruiters have more than 2,000 connections. So you guys are below average. Let's just see a show of hands again. Who has more than 2,000 connections on LinkedIn? So it could be a German thing, but this is below average. But the key thing is, does it matter? Does it actually matter? So when we looked at the data, the super connectors, let's look at those people with 5,000 plus connections. I looked at their funnel, their data to see what the difference was. So focusing on those, we found that there's no difference in their average response rate. So having a bigger network doesn't get people to respond faster to you or get more of them to respond. Okay, that's one thing. There's also no difference in your conversion when you submit candidates to a hiring manager. It seems to be around the same quality. And there's no difference in the shortlist quality whatsoever. There is no difference. Having a huge network is great, but the number of people in your network does not correlate with any level of efficiency as a recruiter. So it begs the question, is it the quality? It's always been the argue, should you have a big network? Should you focus on a quality network? Well, big does not make a damn difference. We didn't and couldn't test quality, but I would still argue quality is still quite important. The quality of that network and the relevance of that network is going to be important. But if somebody else is beating you on size of network, you can give them a big, because that doesn't make a damn difference to being a great recruiter. At least the data suggests that. Doesn't make a difference. So look at the third thing, sources. Where do we look for talent? I feel this makes a difference. Hands up who feels this could make a difference. Where you find the talent. Okay, don't worry, it's not a trick question. It's okay to be honest about this. Where do we look for talent? So this is where people, again, self-report that they find talent or fill their jobs. So when we ask them, of the jobs you fill, where did you find them? Number one source is social media, including professional media like LinkedIn and Zing. And number two is paid job boards. A lot of people I've shared this with them last week would kind of look at that and go, that feels wrong. Okay? It kind of feels a bit wrong to me, but that's the self-reported data. Again, we're not looking at their source of hire on their ATS or CRM. This is asking recruiters, what's your number one place you find talent that you actually hire? Not just find them, but that you make hires from. And they're claiming it's those social media. Direct applicants, career site, only 13%. And it goes to tiny numbers. Even referrals, only 10%. Although some companies are much better than that. So that's where everybody seems to find the talent. And these are the general trends. LinkedIn usage is about the same as it was last year. We didn't ask Zing usage because it's only a sliver of the global data set. But the LinkedIn usage is around the same. It actually dropped a tiny bit. But just to let you know, 100% of super recruiters use LinkedIn. So it's 94% generally, but it's not a big difference to last year of 97%. Facebook's gone up from last year's 37% to 46%. So more people are using Facebook. Not surprising, Balash's session was packed this morning with standing room only. More and more people are looking to Facebook as a source of talent. Instagram's up. Still a small place to find talent. Oscar demonstrated an amazing tool to kind of use geolocation on Instagram, cross-referencing with Facebook data to find talent, which I thought was awesome today. 7% using it as a tool to find talent, which could mean advertising as well as sourcing, up from 4%. So still low, but on the rise. And Twitter crumbling. It was 56% in 2015, dropped to 37% last year, only 23% of people using it this year. And Google Plus, about to fall completely off the cliff forever, from 22% last year down to 13%. So it's quite obvious that Facebook and Instagram are up, LinkedIn around the same, Twitter and Google Plus are down. Now it's very easy to look at this slide and go, brilliant, this is how I should recruit. But again, I'll caution you, this is what people do on average. Let's look at the super recruiters again. Looking at those super recruiters, we find that they have a very different story. So super recruiters, high performers, are more likely to recruit on Facebook. Not by much, 15%, not the end of the world, but they are slightly more likely to use Facebook. They are 121% more likely to use Twitter. They aren't dropping their usage of Twitter. They are 142% more likely to use Instagram. Whilst it's still small, it's much bigger to them than it is to the average recruiter and rising at a faster rate. And they're 53% more likely to recruit on Google+. They also use WhatsApp 145% more. Probably as a messaging tool, difficult to source on WhatsApp. But when you look at the super recruiters, they don't follow the average trends. They really book the trend. When I look at this, I don't see one place as being the place to go. Yes, they all use LinkedIn. They're not using something instead of LinkedIn. They're just using everything more. This is what I've always believed in terms of as a good way to recruit. Super recruiters seem to just use more places and use them more often. There isn't one place that is nirvana for finding talent. The important attribute of a skill is to be multi-channel. You have to be able to use different places, not just to source, but to cross-reference. These days, you rarely find all the information you need in one place. And so the skill of being able to jump from one to the other to build a more complete profile is really, really valuable. So that's the thing I'd like you to think about around sources. Not that there's a new place you need to go find. It's just that you need to be on your game for many places. You never know where you might have to go for different talent. You need to back up sources. Don't rely on this kind of moving to the median that everyone else seems to be doing. And last thing, engagement. How important is one-on-one communication? So again, just to share some general stats. These are response rates by medium. This is year-to-year comparison, the blue being this year. So LinkedIn connecting, so sending a connection request is down a bit. It's a good thing. People just send a connection request and write a note. InMail is around the same, sending InMail or direct messaging, paid messaging. Email is up a little bit. And phone, weirdly, is way down. So again, this would suggest that using the kind of paid tool is pretty good. Email is not a bad thing to do, but phone is becoming less popular. Again, you could read, well, I shouldn't use phone. I should use email a bit more, and I'm fine using my InMail over my LinkedIn connections. Response rates was always the thing I was interested in. What's the response rate on that, or what's your first contact? So the average first contact is by InMail. Half of all recruiters, when they want to reach out to somebody, send an InMail. It's the default way to reach out to somebody. And you see that sending a LinkedIn connection request, the poor man's version of an InMail, is the next most popular. Now, when you look at super recruiters, interestingly, they rely on InMail almost as much as the average recruiter. So it's not that they're kind of doing a fundamentally different thing. But if you look at the other sources, they are much more likely to also use phone and email. So phone and email are much, much higher in their percentage mix than the average recruiter. So you see that LinkedIn is being proven on both cases being a valuable way to reach out to somebody. But the super recruiters, just like their source, they're not relying on one way to engage either. They're more likely to back up ways to engage than the average recruiter. So when we look at the data and summarize it, those super recruiters who had efficient funnels, they're 4 times more likely to use the phone than the average recruiter. 1/3 less likely to use a connection request as a way to reach out to somebody. They're not just better at getting responses, but they're twice as likely to progress these candidates to shortlist. And this is where I'm going to just make a big leap. Okay, this is my opinion, not necessarily the data, but it's based on the data. When I look at that, oh, by the way, sorry, they on average are more experienced. So super recruiters typically have, according to our data, 9.5 years experience on average versus the average recruiter in our data set had 7.5, 7.6 years experience. So when I think about engagement, and we talked last year about personalization of your messaging and using different tools, personalization requires you to deeply understand your candidate and your candidate marketplace. Does everyone agree with that? And to really do a good personal email, you kind of need to know who the heck you're reaching out to. Understand the area you recruit within, understand competitors, the industry, etc. So high personalization correlates with kind of deep knowledge of the industry. And it seems to be that when you get a higher response rate, you're also much better at progressing a higher number of those candidates to the hiring team. I think this is because in the personalization, you attract better people. You're probably searching better because you know your industry, and you're more able to convince somebody. You think about it, getting someone to respond is going to be correlated with convincing them to go forward. It's the first stage of the same process. Someone who can convince you to have a conversation is more likely going to be able to convince you in that conversation to go to the next stage. And this is what we see. And this is why I believe one of the big differentiators is domain knowledge, is knowing the sector you're recruiting for, knowing the technical skills, or knowing the competitors, whatever that might be. Having a really good understanding of the type of candidates you recruit for. Super hard to be a generalist these days. You can hire multiple skills as long as you really know the industry you're hiring for. But you do need to have deep domain knowledge to be a successful recruiter. So I'll sum those things up. Super recruiters, we can all be these super recruiters by focusing on a few things. You have to accept, I think, volume sourcing and recruitment administration will be automated. Now, I didn't say strategic or specialist sourcing. That's always going to be a skill we'll need. But volume sourcing, there's some really good tools that do a great job, and they do it in a second rather than a week that the average sourcer can do it in, right? So they're going to be automated. If your job involves those skills, you need to basically upskill and change your skill set pretty darn quickly. Second of all, being connected to everyone in your sector is not as important as knowing your sector really, really well. So that's the differentiator, that domain knowledge. Pick out the right people, understand what people are doing, listen. That's really, really important. Third, there's no one place you'll find all the talent. Stop looking for it. Be comfortable in many places and be willing to go to those other places, second, third, fourth source of talent. Multi-channel is really, really important. And communication is the most valuable skill of the super recruiter and the super sourcer, I think. Being adept at listening, because communication is largely about listening, hearing what they're saying to you, sucking that in, that is one of the most important skills that I think we need to develop within the recruitment world. They're the things that matter. Reinventing careers and learning is now the #2 business issue, according to Deloitte. So Burson by Deloitte do a survey every single year where they collect all this data. The #1 issue is organizational change, the new type of organization. The #2 is we need to reinvent careers because the shelf life of the average job is just disappearing. We're producing university grads these days for that can do jobs that won't exist in 5 to 10 years. So the career within recruiting is rapidly changing. I've seen a massive movement, and I'm sure you have, from generalization, a recruiter, to 10 different functions within recruiting, 20 different functions within recruiting. That's a real, real shift. And to be able to change your team and upskill them and develop them has been really the need here. Digital disruption requires those skills to develop or adapt. By listening, by coming to conferences, by learning, by reaching out to others, upskilling yourself, listening to podcasts, doing formal training, watching videos online, whatever it might be, that is how you can keep up with the new inventions. I look back, as now a 20-year recruiter, I look back at the industry that I was in as a kid in terms of the video industry, and how much that has changed in the last 20, 25 years. This is now the thing that replaced me after about a decade or 2 decades. And I asked myself, are we going to be replaced? But I look at my job. My job as a recruiter evolved to be one of a trainer, walking on site, spending 8 hours with teams, doing in-person training. And that evolved too, because I realized that industry is dying a death as well. And coincidentally, I took the thing that killed my old industry, and I made it what I do today. So this is what our product looks like today. Quite similar to the thing that killed my last job. So you have to be able to, just as I realized in my career, you have to be able to evolve and adapt and understand the technology that's changing it and embrace it. I have a lot more fun doing what I do today than I did 20 years ago. And it's about making sure that for you, you're finding the next 10 years in your industry. You're looking at the team around you and developing their skills, developing yours, looking at technology, embracing what organizations like Unilever and others are doing, finding your way of doing it as well. Thank you. I think we have a little bit of time for questions, if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, we
on
have
any of
time
that.
for questions.
Awesome.
Yeah, of course. Are there any questions in the audience?
We can send a mic around if anyone has any questions.
While you're thinking, one question from my side.
Shoot.
It was very interesting. Thank you very much for your presentation. Do you think super recruiters are born as super recruiters, or do you think it is possible to develop?
I'll see what the audience thinks. Do you think you can, hands up thinks you have to be born a super recruiter? All right. Hands up thinks you can develop anyone to be a super recruiter. So it's not an opinion, I know this. Most people I know who are building out big TA teams, especially internal teams for the first time, they're hiring grads, bright people who can work with, as in they're grads to our industry of all ages, who can just work with technology, who adapt, who listen, communicate well, and within 6 to 12 months you can produce a super recruiter. 100% believe that. They'll get better all the time, but you can build that. You know, Balish, you've given on talks on the sourcing factory and other things, and an evolution of that is kind of, there's a way of doing it well, there's a way of developing good process and good learning within the team. So I absolutely think anybody can be that super recruiter.
It's great to hear. So, questions from your side?
I might pose a question if you don't mind. Is anyone here using any sort of machine learning or AI technology or chatbots in their recruiting process at the moment? Do you mind sharing with us how you're using it or what you're doing? Sorry, we'll get a microphone straight over to you. It's a long way to shout.
No.
You might just let us know, if you don't mind, the industry or business you work for and how you're using that technology.
Hi, I am Tülay. My name is Tülay from Turkcell. Turkcell is a telecommunication solutions and a communication company. So, of course, our company supports us for technology. And we know now need to be, yesterday's hiring best practices replaced by digital solutions. So, we are recruiting candidates by chatbot, mobile chatbot, video recruitments. We are using all digital solutions, actually. Now, yesterday's morning, we have speak about hiring young talents in digital age. So we talk about it, actually. If you look at our PDF after this session, you can watch it. And actually, I like your speak a lot, because really you can show us the journey from yesterday's hiring and today's recruiting, you know. So for big volumes, it's really beneficial to use technology, digital solutions, especially for junior roles, new graduates. But senior roles, you need more human touch, you know, so needs more headhunting.
I might share two stories on that. One is a friend of mine runs the recruiting team in the second largest healthcare provider in the UK. So they run nursing homes, and they put a very inexpensive chatbot on their website because they were losing a lot of people, and their competitor has a 24-hour recruiting team, at least call answering team, and they were losing candidates because their type of candidate would come home late at night from working in a care home, and you couldn't interact with the recruiting team. And the chatbot does this live for them. And they drove in 24 hours, and from then on, a 60% improvement in their applicant rate by just putting a chatbot in. Second story, though, is I was in San Francisco last week, and a guy in the audience put up his hand when I asked that question and said they use technology, and they have an automatic search technology, and then they have automation around the engagement, which is the sensitive part in terms of a lot of people talk about skills, high touch. They have a drip campaign running through their CRM that will send out up to 6 messages sequentially after the other to get follow-up and get people to be engaged. So it's not personalized in that it's a machine. It's just a simple algorithm of messaging and first name. I asked him what type of skills. And he said AI skills, deep machine learning engineers, really hard to find technical specialists. And they were getting 65% response rates from the original pool through a really good process. So it was set up using things like MailChimp, bolstered onto iSIMs and other things like that. But even in very specialist niche skills, I'm hearing more and more use cases where they are able to put those kind of things in place and do kind of volume recruiting using technology. So it's not typical, but it's definitely there. Definitely there.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions?
They want to go home, Robin.
Yeah,
They're
perhaps. Was 2 great days. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Great presentation.